20 years ago, almost to the day, I was sitting out there in the audience. I wasn't yet a RedR member, and I was in my first week as a graduate engineer at Arrow in London. Earlier on in the evening, I'd been invited to the pre-talk drinks, and I was standing in one of the grand wood-panelled rooms of Great George Street, all on my own, feeling a bit of a numpty, to use one of my sister's favourite words. I hadn't yet honed my networking skills, and everyone seemed to be in a real impenetrable conversation. And so I was sort of sipping my wine nervously, looking for an opportunity to slip out. Just as I was about to make my move, there was a little tap on my shoulder, and a sort of kind and familiar voice. "Hello, young man." So I turned round. "Oh, hello." It was Princess Anne. "And who are you? And what are you doing here?" "I'm Nick, and I work for Arrow." She says, "Well, have you met your chairman?" "No." He went, Bob, over here." "Meet Nick. Nick has just started at your company. I'm sure you've got plenty to talk about." And with that, she walked off. Me and Chairman Bob to get to know each other. So, sadly, disappointingly, probably for all of you, that royal introduction didn't lead to my eventual chairmanship of Arrow, but it did lead to 6 very happy years of engineering in London and some very, very enjoyable RedR assignments. And so what I'm going to attempt tonight is probably a bit of a messy mashup of describing some of my RedR assignments and intercut it with the story of the circular economy. Because that's what I'm based on the Isle of Wight now. I work for the MacArthur Foundation, and that is what their mandate is, to accelerate the transition to a circular economy. So my first deployment was back in 2003 to northern Afghanistan, a very, very beautiful part of the world. And there was just this little window of peace between 2 very, very long periods of war and violence. The reason I was there, I was a water engineer, and so my main responsibilities were addressing this sort of water scarcity, but also the fact that for 20 years these villages have been abandoned. And so the infrastructure there was a big diaspora to Iran, to Pakistan, and they're pretty well abandoned, so all the infrastructure is in a bit of a state of disrepair. And so my remit was reservoirs, irrigation structures, and wells. Lots and lots of wells. Very, very, quite impressive structures, actually. Some of them, they're all hand excavated, some of them are more than 20 metres deep, and all of them required these sort of well rings, reinforced concrete well rings to support the walls. But when I arrived, the way those well rings were procured was a sort of distributed manufacturing model, where the well rings were made at the beneficiary site. So there was a set of metal formwork for all of those well rings. As a result, the quality wasn't very good. There was a lot of well rings that couldn't be used. Cement and steel was wasted and oversupplied. Basically, it wasn't a very good situation. So what I think this is a bit of a sort of an allegory for the situation our global economy is in. We don't make very effective use of our resources. And I think Andrew's story about the bucket travelling all around the world is probably quite an illustration of that. So how is this manifest? Well, one of the ways it's manifest is in the huge amounts of material waste that our economy generates. You could say it's like an efficient waste-generating machine. So there was a report by WEF, the World Economic Forum, earlier this year, on e-waste. The production of e-waste. So I'm going to open this up to the audience. Can you guess how much e-waste is produced every year? And as our unit, we're going to use the weight of a jumbo jet. Would anyone like to offer a guess?
800.
800 jumbo jets worth of e-waste. Lower? Higher?
Higher.
Higher? Anyone want to go higher than that? 10,000. 120,000 jumbo jets worth of e-waste every year. Greater in weight than all of the aeroplanes ever made. And in terms of value, it would be 120th in GDP countries, or 3 times the production of all the silver mines in the world. But not only material waste. I mean, there's also the natural system degradation, the carbon emissions, but this important thing called structural waste. We have the way we use our assets in our economy. They are, you know, they're not used very well. Like the average, we did a report a few years ago. The average European car sits around doing nothing for 92% of the time. I mean, would you design a mobility system where one of your most important components sits around doing nothing for 9 out of 10 hours? In the US, cars take up about 50 to 60% of a city area. Yeah? So think how our cities could be transformed by having a more effective mobility system. Yeah, so we call our current situation a take, make, dispose economy, or a linear economy. Oh, so to resolve this Afghanistan situation, we moved to a centralised, well-ring manufacturing sort of model, and as a result, quality went up, waste went down, and we made more use of this expensive metal formwork. So, the next assignment I went was to Indonesia in 2006. Incredible. I mean, just the scale of destruction was just, and the impact was staggering. In some places, it felt like a sort of complete reconfiguration of the landscape. So, the reason I was there was to help a US NGO with the reconstruction of villages damaged by the tsunami. The engineering team that I inherited, they were doing their best. They were identifying infrastructure that needed fixing. They were trying to procure projects, and doing their best to patch things up. But there wasn't a very coherent model for this village reconstruction. And so what we introduced was a little bit more of a spatial planning approach. Yeah? And what that involved was we took satellite imagery of after and before. So we put village boundaries on, and then we overlaid roads, drainage channels, rivers, and then we created these village master plan, village plans. For locating facilities, we used sphere standards, we used community participation, we used new regulations that came in on buffer zones and escape corridors. And basically we built up these village master plans, and with that model, we were able to then progress confidently. And as actually a bonus, the villages were able to use these plans to leverage more funds. So, what would a coherent model for the global economy look like? We don't make very effective use of our resources. It's so much of the economy is coupled to the consumption of finite resources. So basically, that can't last. I mean, by definition, that can't last. Yeah. So these were the kind of questions that our founder, Ellen MacArthur, the sailor, pondered as one of her journeys. The voyage had ended, and a new journey began. That journey, she read extensively, she talked to academics, she talked to other systems thinkers who were pondering similar questions, and the result was the founding of the foundation. And the foundation, which was about the circular economy, the early stages was about creating this model, and this model is underpinned by these three core principles. We want to design out waste and externalities, we want to keep products in use, products, materials and components in use, and we want to regenerate natural systems. One of my roles at the foundation is, one of the roles is I work for the food initiative, so thank you for the food waste comment. But also it is to write, identify and write about pioneering companies, projects and initiatives in the circular economy space. So whenever I get a new company, new project on my desk, is this circular economy? This is what I apply. I apply these principles. Does it adhere to 1, 2, or 3 of these principles? So, and then with these principles, then we have this, what we call the circular economy systems diagram, nicknamed the butterfly model. So the butterfly model, this is about value creation. So how can the circular economy is about, it's not about, the world is, heating up. we have pollution, all that kind of stuff. But there is an amazing economic opportunity in doing things differently. That's a really important thing. So this is about how you can create value in the circular economy. On the right, technical materials, things that you use, mobile phones, washing machines, buildings, that kind of stuff. And these loops are about the strategies for conserving the labour, the energy, the resources that you put in to making your products, materials and components. Products, components and materials. Sharing, maintaining, remanufacturing, reusing, eventually recycling. On the left is the biological cycle. So this is food and the bioeconomy. So the real overarching aim there is to regenerate natural systems, so get nutrients back to the soils for the next generation of crops. But when you're making beer, you have your grain, you malt your grain, you seep it, you get out the sugars. What you're left with, massive. You're left with proteins, fibre. You can make structural materials. You can make six-pack ring pulls. You can create energy. You can grow mushrooms. You can eventually get the carbon back into the soil. So that's what it is. That's sort of cascaded uses, and then regenerate the systems. So, and basically what we've been doing for the last 10 years since developing this model is we've been applying it to different product sectors, different regions of the world, different materials, proving time and time again that there's an incredible economic opportunity doing things differently, as well as reducing carbon emissions, improving water quality, societal benefits, and so on. So I just want to give you a concrete example of value creation in the circular economy, but I'm going to tee it up by telling you about my third assignment. So this is now 2006, and Uganda, another RedR assignment. Thank you, RedR. And this was an African Development Bank funded project rehabilitating the National Aquaculture Research and Development Centre, as well as 3 regional fry centres. Fry basically are little sort of inch-long fish. Yes, you get almost fingerlings here, and then they can just be put into the commercial fish farming sort of network. But it was a bit higgledy-piggledy, a bit of a state of disrepair. This is 2006. The project was conceived in sort of 2001. At that time, by the way, the project I was working on was part of a bigger program about aquaculture and wild fisheries. When the project was conceived, the allocation of funds, 80% to wild fisheries, 20% to aquaculture. By the time I arrived, the client, the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries, had managed to persuade the African Development Bank that it should be 50-50, reflecting the new reality. Massive overexploitation of all the rivers, all the lakes in the country, growing population, and the need to provide protein. So I learned many things in my year and a half rehabilitating this site, doing the design and the rehabilitation. But one of the things that really stuck in my mind was that probably the single most important thing that determines the economic viability of fish farming is, anyone?
Temperature.
Feed. The availability of feed, the cost and availability of feed.
Feedstuffs.
Feed, feed for the fish, fatten them up. By 2015, what's happened in Uganda had been confirmed by the FAO. In 2015, the FAO did a report. For the first time in human history, we get more fish from fish farms than we get from the wild. So, where do we get our feed to feed our fish in the fish farms? Fish. Pelagic species that we don't want to eat, that are quite very far offshore, so big carbon footprint. You take away these species and it has a terrible destabilisation effect on the marine food chain. So not a good situation. Fortunately, that was a design. Fortunately, there are companies, and there's actually one in the UK, or in London, called Entercycle. I encourage you to look that up. They're based in London Bridge. They're just sort of doing the prototypes at the moment. But there is another, probably the biggest scale example of this is a company called Agri Protein in South Africa, based in Cape Town. Actually, they have a facility in Cape Town and Durban. What they do is they take commercial waste, commercial organic waste, municipal waste, and sort of food processing byproducts, and they grow insect larvae. They grow black soldier flies. quite an interesting species of fly, by the way. The flies, the adults, don't have a mouth. So they're not actually a pest, really. They're never going to be a pest. They don't like to eat. All they like to do is find a friend and make some eggs. But the larvae are incredible. The larvae, yeah, so all of the waste, you know, that I was just talking about, the commercial byproducts, they feed the larvae. The larvae, their weight gain in 20 days is like going from a newborn baby going to a baby elephant in 20 days. It's remarkable. Yeah, and so they sort of valorize that waste so that you dry out, you actually squeeze, you dry the larvae, you squeeze it, you squeeze oil out. That oil is a very, very good sort of nutritional supplement for livestock. The larvae, dried larvae, squeezed with the oil, like the olives, that's the aquaculture feed. 80% less than normal, 80% less carbon emissions than normal feed. Also for poultry and pigs, and it can be in pets and stuff. And then what's left over, the frass, which is, you know, insect poop to you and me, that can then go back to farms to regenerate and grow the next generation of crops. So this is classic circular economy. Their Cape Town facility processes 250 tonnes of waste a day, 90,000 tonnes a year, turns over 7.5 million, and employs about 30 or 40 local people. Yeah, that's classic circular economy. Something that's a waste, now 3 revenue streams, creating employment and regenerating natural systems. Oh, okay, so how can we, so very quickly, so how can this be overlaid onto the world of humanitarian and the aid industry? So, like caveat, I know the aid sector is a little bit different from the normal economy. You know, sometimes there's more of an urgency for it, there's life-threatening situations, etc., etc. So this doesn't apply, obviously. That's the most important thing, saving lives and stabilising the situation. But I do think, and in my experience, there is a chance to have a little bit more of a considered sort of response and thinking about, you know, your designs and stuff. And it's a pretty significant sector. I try to find a figure on it, between 30 to $50 billion worth of goods and services are procured every year by the aid sector. And the scale is big. There's a camp in Kenya, is it Dadaab? 200,000 people. And then there was a report I saw that the average, there's something like 2.6 million refugees who have been in a camp for 5 years or longer. So, you know, there is time to be a little bit more considered. So and I'll just last few minutes. So I was just thinking, how can I sort of, apply it to the humanitarian world? And so what I thought was like, these are our founding schools of thought. You might be familiar with some of them. The cradle to cradle, biomimicry, the performance economy. These guys, these gentlemen, they asked some pretty, some interesting questions. Like, for example, Walter Stahlheld, this guy here, he asked a question: do we need to own everything, or do we just need the services they provide? So when you're procuring a piece of equipment, do you need the actual piece of equipment that may be unutilized? It may be only used for 6 months, or can you just? Is there a different business model that you could perhaps procure? Thomas Gradle, this idea that there is waste in nature. There's no waste. Waste is feedstock for the next stage of the cycle. So if there's any time that there's waste being generated, we like to call waste it's a sort of design flaw. If there's waste, so is there a way of taking waste like the plastic packaging that lots of the equipment comes in? Can that have a secondary use? Also human waste, and there's lots of companies. I think there's a few examples. Waste transformers, which is sort of these containerized energy and fertilizer producers from human waste, and also Sanergy. I think a few of you might have come across. They're demonstrating this is possible. And then, can we design stuff? If you're in a nice position where you actually can design equipment for this sector, can you design it so that it can be flexible, adaptable, durable? This example I came across, Better Design. It's got a very durable shell and shell, and so when the plastic paneling, after 2 or 3 years, you might get UV degradation, you can actually just replace it with locally available clay bricks and that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then maybe, just one. So this whole idea about regenerating natural systems. This guy, Yakubo Sawadogo. He was described as the guy who stopped the desert from Burkina Faso. And he just used a very, very simple, traditional, these are called zai holes. This is called cordon pierreux, these stone belts. And what they do is they trap scarce amounts of water. You can put organic matter in them, then you can put sort of plants or trees. And as they grow, there's a positive feedback loop. And basically you increase the humidity in the area. After 10 years, he transformed 30 hectares of basically, so it's like a peri-desert area, the Sahel. And now it's a very productive area, probably the most productive forest in his area, and it's giving resilience in times of, in times of drought. And then the final thing, it's pretty well my favourite school of thought, biomimicry. What can we learn from nature? So maybe, ask yourself the question, what would nature do here? Nature has spent 3.8 billion years refining its structures, its behaviours, its processes, yeah? And often there is a solution there. And this whole biomimicry movement, I urge you to go to something like asknature.org. You can put in your questions there, and maybe you'll get some ideas from there. Because it's 3.8 billion. It's the biggest R&D resource that you could never afford. Okay, so in summary, so basically, we're sort of, most of our economy is this linear take, make, waste. We don't make very effective use of our resources. But we have this model that can create value, keep products in use, design out waste and externalities. It's there. And thirdly, it's happening. There are many companies around the world that are already incorporating circular thinking into their designs, into their operations, and they're proving that there are benefits to be had. If you want to learn more, just go to the website. We have a sort of a deep dive. If you want to know more about the circular economy, there's a circular design guide for designers. There's case studies, or just get in touch with me. And I'll leave this with Alex, by the way. So if you need. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, everyone.